I Know What You Did Last Wednesday, Part 5. It only took us an hour to cover the island. There really wasn't very much there. Most of it was covered in gorse that only came up to the knee, which no killer could have hidden behind, unless, of course, he happened to be extremely small. There were a few trees, but we checked the branches, and Tim even climbed one to see if anyone was hiding at the top. Then we climbed up to help Tim down again, and we moved on. We came to a couple of ruined outbuildings. I went inside. There was nobody there, but I did see something. Another security camera, fixed to the brickwork. Of course, a rich man like Rory would have to be careful about security. I remember the camera I'd noticed in the kitchen. He had probably covered the whole island. Was that why I had felt like we were being watched? We went past the house and continued towards the crocodile's tail. The ground rose steeply up, finally arriving at a narrow point at least 20 metres above the sea. This was what I had seen from the boat. 6 great rocks, steel grey and needle sharp, rose out of the water from far below. Looking down made my head spin. I wondered briefly if there might be a cave somewhere, perhaps tucked underneath the lip where we were standing. But then a wave rolled in, crashing against the cliff face. If there was a killer down there, he'd be soaking wet. And anyway, as far as I could see, there was no way down. We moved away, retracing our steps. There was nobody outside the house. But how about inside? Starting in the hall, we went from room to room. The library, the dining room, the conservatory, the hall, and so on. We looked behind curtains, under tables, in the fireplaces, and up the chimneys. Tim even looked in the grandfather clocks. Maybe he thought he'd find somebody's father. We covered the ground floor, and then we went up to the first. Here were the bedrooms with our names still attached to the doors. We went in every one of them. There was nobody there, apart from the 3 very dead bodies. It wasn't easy searching those particular rooms, but we made ourselves, although I think Tim was wasting his time doing it with his eyes tightly shut. Nobody in the rooms, nobody in the corridors. We found the attic, but all that was there was a water tank. Tim dipped his head in, and I made a mental note not to drink any more water, not with his dandruff. Eventually, we gave up. We'd been everywhere. There was nowhere else to look. We started going back down to the kitchen, but I'd only got halfway there when Libby let out a little gasp. "What is it?" Eric demanded. "There." She pointed at the wall at the end of the corridor. I don't know why. I didn't see it before. What she had seen was a black and white photograph in a silver frame. It was hanging right in the middle of the wall with enough space around it to make it stand out. The question was, had Rory hung it there, or had it been someone else? Was this something we were meant to see? The photograph showed 9 teenagers, all wearing the same uniform. It's funny how people change in 10 years, but I recognised them at once. Eric Draper, Janet Rhodes, Mark Tyler, Brenda Blake, Sylvie Binns, Libby Goldman, Rory McDougall, and Tim. Tim looked the weirdest of them all. He had long hair then, and spots, lots of spots. Of course, I wouldn't have looked too great then when the picture had been taken. But then I would only have been 4 years old. There was one face, however, that I didn't know. He was standing on the edge of the group, slightly apart, a thin, gangly teenager with curly hair and glasses. He was wearing an anorak and a sort of face you'd expect to see on a train spotter. "Who's he?" I asked. "That's Johnny," Brenda replied. "Johnny Nadler. He was one of my best friends." "And mine," Libby agreed. "Everyone liked Johnny. We used to hang out with him in the yard." She walked closer to the photograph. I remember when this was taken. It was a prize-giving day. He came second in geography. I came first. "Wait a minute," I interrupted. "Everyone in this photograph is not here on Crocodile Island. Everyone except Johnny Nadler." "You're right," Mark agreed. "Why wasn't he invited?" "Because he's a killer," Eric snapped. "He's got to be." "But why would Johnny want to kill Rory?" Brenda asked. "The 2 of them were friends, and every day after school he used to catch the bus with Sylvie, even though it took him 8 miles in the wrong direction. That's how much he liked her." "He let Janet cut his hair," Libby went on. "She accidentally cut a chunk out of his ear, but he didn't mind. In fact, he laughed all the way to the hospital. Johnny wouldn't hurt anyone." "What else can you tell me about him?" I asked. "He came second in history as well as geography," Eric said. "He was really clever. He was always playing with model planes and cars," Mark added. "He used to build them himself. We always said he'd be an inventor when he left school, but in fact he ended up working at Boots. I saw him there once when I went to get some ointment." He blushed. I had athlete's foot. "Did any of the rest of you ever see him again?" I asked. Everyone shook their heads. I looked at the photograph again. It did seem strange that he was the only one in the picture who hadn't been invited to Crocodile Island. But did that make him a killer? And if so, where on earth was he? We had searched the entire island, and we are certain now that we are the only ones there. Eric looked at his watch. It was 12:30. I suggest we continue this meeting downstairs, he said. I need to change, Brenda said. Me too, Libby agreed. Everyone started to move in different directions. Hold on a minute, I said. I thought we were all going to stick together. I think we should all stay in this room. Don't be ridiculous, Eric snapped. We have to eat something. It's lunchtime. And anyway, we've searched the island. We know there's nobody else here. Well, I'm staying with Tim, I said. How do you know I'm not the killer? Tim demanded. Because whoever killed Rory and the others is brilliant and fiendish, and you have trouble tying your shoelaces. That was what I thought, but I didn't say anything. I just shrugged. I don't want to be near anyone, Libby said. I feel safer on my own. Me too, Brenda nodded. And I'm certainly not having anyone in the room with me while I'm changing. We can meet in 10 minutes, Eric said. We're inside the house and we know there's nobody else on the island. We'll meet in the dining room at 20 to 1. He was wrong, of course. There was one little group that was never going to meet again. This was one little group that was never going to meet again. But how could we know that? We were scared and we weren't thinking straight. Tim and I went back to our room. Tim scratched his head, which was still damp from the water tank. Johnny could be hiding on the island, he said. What if there's a secret room? The same thought had already occurred to me, but I'd tapped every wall and every wooden panel, and nothing sounded hollow. I don't think there are any secret rooms, Tim, I said. But you can't be sure. Tim began to tap his way along the wall, and his eyes half closed, listening for hollow sounds. A few moments later he straightened up, excited. There's definitely something on the other side here, he cried. I know, Tim, I said. That's the window. I left him in the bedroom, drying his hair, and he went back downstairs. I was going to join the others in the dining room, but I never got that far. I was about halfway down when I heard it, a short, sudden scream. There was a crashing sound. It had come from somewhere outside. I ran the rest of the way, through the hall and out the front door. Mark Tyler appeared, running round the side of the house. What is it? He demanded. He was trying not to sound scared, but it wasn't working. Round the back? We went there together, moving more slowly now, knowing we were going to find not what knowing we went there together, moving more slowly now, knowing what we were going to find, not wanting to find it. The kitchen door opened and Brenda Blake came out. I noticed she was breathing heavily. This time it was Libby Goldman. I'm afraid she has recorded the last episode of Libby's Lounge, and for her final credits were already rolling. Why had she gone outside? Maybe she decided to light up one of her cigarettes, in which case this was on the one time when smoking certainly had been bad for her health. Fatal, in fact. It hadn't been the tobacco that killed her. Something had hit her hard on the head. Something that had been dropped from above. I looked up, working out the angles. We were both directly underneath the battlements. Behind them the roof was flat. It would have been easy enough for someone to hide up there, to wait for anyone of us to step outside. Libby must have come out to get a breath of fresh air before the meeting. Air wasn't something she'd be needing again. There were footsteps on the gravel. Eric and Mark had arrived. They stared in silence. Mark stretched out a finger and pointed, and took me a minute to work out what he was pointing at. That was how much his finger was trembling. And there it was, lying in the grass. At first I didn't recognise the object that had been dropped from the roof, and which had fallen right onto Libby Goldman. I mean, I knew what it was, but I couldn't believe that's what had been used. It was a big round ball, a globe, the sort of thing you'll find in a library. Maybe it had been in Rory's library, before the killer had carried it up to the roof. The United States of America was facing up. It was stained red. I looked at Eric Draper. His mouth had dropped open. He looked genuinely shocked. Mark Tyler was standing opposite him, staring. Brenda Blake, to one side. She was crying. One of them had to be faking it. I was certain of it. One of them had to have climbed down from the room after watching Libby fall. There was nobody else here. One of them had to be the killer. But which one?